Jerry Park is an associate professor of sociology at Baylor University. He received his bachelor's degree in psychology with a minor in sociology from the University of Virginia and pursued a master's and PhD in sociology with a focus on religion and race-ethnic relations at the University of Notre Dame. He served as a research assistant on the Panel Survey of American Religion and Ethnicity and subsequently joined Baylor University's sociology department as an assistant professor in 2004. So he's been there for 20 years. One of Jerry's areas of interest remains the sociology of religion, but his focus has shifted more towards the sociology of race relations with a particular emphasis on Asian Americans. His research includes topics such as racial, ethnic, and religious inequality, identity, culture, intergroup relations, prejudice, and discrimination. Over the past few years, Jerry has started blogging on a group site, Black, White, and Gray, and is also an occasional blogger for Asian Nation. Jerry, it's my privilege and delight to welcome you back to our day-long hybrid conference. The floor is yours. Please begin your presentation and note that we'll have about 20 minutes of discussion after your presentation. Thank you so much, Jerry.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, David. First off, I want to say once again, thank you to David Chow and the Center for Asian American Christianity at Princeton Seminary for this opportunity to share some insights during this pivotal moment in our political history. Now, some of you may be familiar with the work of APIA Vote and AAPI Data, where they have provided up-to-the-minute analysis on Asian Americans' political sentiments now that the National Opinion Research Center has an Asian American oversample panel called Amplify, if I recall correctly. Now, rather than walk you through all those findings, I thought I would instead use some of the results to frame what I think is missing and important in this election. And before we begin, I just wanted to acknowledge that the image you see on the right is actually generated from ChatGPT using the keywords Asian American religion politics. It took several rounds to produce most of this image, but I still needed to call on graduate students who knew how to image edit to get rid of the garbage nonsense words that showed up at the top and the bottom of this particular image. Okay, so as a quick preview, this presentation is broken into two parts. The first makes a case that religion is an important vector for understanding Asian American views on politics. Second, I will introduce how the ideology of white Christian nationalism offers a different view of how religion affects political attitudes and decisions that stand apart from traditional understandings of religion. So, what do we know about the Asian American vote so far? What I want to show you first is the total and ethnic distribution of the largest Asian groups in Asian America today. First, I want to show you data from the Collaborative Multiracial Post-Election Survey, or CMPS for short, that was collected in April of 2021 through August of 2021. And I want to show you, next to it, the APIA Vote AAPI Data Survey from NORC that was done this past April and May in 2024. So, as we already know, Asian Americans mobilized far more in 2020 than at any other time in U.S. history. And it was clear that the majority, 2/3, preferred Biden over Trump. And as you can see from the 6 major Asian ethnic groups, none of them stood out as more in favor of Trump over Biden. This was one of the first surprises in 2020. In decades past, Vietnamese and Korean Americans, to a lesser extent, generally leaned toward the GOP. But in 2020, majorities of these ethnic constituents selected Biden over Trump. Now, compare that to the results from the April-May 2024 NORC survey. Biden had a lead, but only Chinese Americans were a majority in favor of him over Trump. So did the remainder then prefer Trump? Actually, no. At most, 38% of Vietnamese Americans preferred Trump, the highest of all the major ethnic groups. So where is the remainder? In the other category. A sizable minority, large enough to tilt the election one way or another if all of them selected one candidate or the other, were undecided on the preferred candidate of the presidency. This is definitely an indication that among Asian Americans, the candidates presented choices that many have an issue with. But when we compare that April-May 2024 survey with the one conducted in September, after Kamala Harris stepped in to replace Biden, we get the following. Harris is well supported by every Asian ethnic group, all groups exceeding 62%. Sentiment for Trump went down except for Korean Americans, who went from 27% preferring him to 35% when Harris was now the new competitor. Now, that's a data point worth examining, but we're not going to do that today. So these findings give the impression that by and large, if Asian America is primarily known by their ethnic groupings, there is a pan-ethnic voting bloc. Asian Americans, regardless of ethnicity, were generally favorable to Biden during the last election and favorable to Harris in the month of September preceding the November election. Now, I would like to make the case that we need to know about this religious factor, taking the title of the late sociologist Gerhard Lansky's book. I reviewed the available data from the two sources I showed you, and as I suspected, neither the April, May, nor the September surveys of Asian Americans contain a question on religious affiliation. With a grant from the Louisville Institute, I was able to add in questions to the 2020 CMPS, and I just received a small grant at the last minute to get the same questions added to the 2024 survey. So, while I wanted to show how religion might matter with the most recent available data, we will have to use the previous election results and look forward to the 2024 survey, which will be fielded in January 2025 through April. So if there's interest in this, maybe we can discuss it next next year around this time. All right. The 2020 Collaborative Multiracial Post-Election Survey is the data that grounds the rest of the talk. Now, we all remember the January 6th incident 2021, and the primary investigators of the CMPS wisely decided to wait for a few months to field the survey since we had landed in uncharted waters as a society. More on that later. I won't go into the details of the survey, but suffice it to say, it is one of the only surveys with a large random oversample of Asian Americans numbering nearly 4,000 respondents. The only ones larger than this are the Pew Research Center's 2023 Asian American survey, which had over 7,000 respondents. Combining responses to religious affiliation and religious label choice questions, I was able to code the religious affiliations of this sample of Asian Americans, and you get the following. About 38% of the respondents are Christian, and these are subdivided into three categories: Catholics, Protestants who identify exclusively with terms evangelical, fundamentalist, and Pentecostal, and then all the other Christians. So going forward, I'm going to call the one group conservative Protestant Christians, and the other non-conservative Protestant Christians. Unlike most surveys of white American Christians, the smaller branch of Protestants among Asian Americans are the conservative ones. And unlike most racialized groups in the United States, Asian Americans are not dominated by Christians. Audiences I've shared this with sometimes are surprised by this, but it's been the case since the first national survey of Asian Americans back in 2001. If we add up the atheists, agnostics, and those with no other religious preference, we have another quarter, or about 27%, who do not have a stated religion. And another similar sized fraction consists of the major world religions of Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. Now, there are other categories that you can see here, and it's a lot. So going forward, I'm only going to focus on the Christian groups, that is, conservative Protestants, non-conservative Christians, Catholics, as well as Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists, and agnostics, atheists, and nuns. And so here's why religion matters in a way that's distinct from ethnicity. In the 2020 election, there was one Asian American religious group that had a majority preference for Trump, conservative Protestants. 58% of them preferred Trump over Biden, who took only 35% of their votes. All other religious groups supported Biden. So some qualifications should be stated. Compared to white conservative Protestants, Asian American conservative Protestants were less in favor. That is, a smaller majority of them voted in favor of Trump by about at least 12 percentage points. So white conservative Protestants, very adamant, very supportive of Trump. Asian American conservative Protestants, less so, but still the majority. And though it's clear in the picture, it bears noting more than a third of conservative Protestant Asian Americans supported Biden in 2020. If your mind has a tendency to villainize voter groups, I hope that this helps you to dial back some of that urge. And it bears noting that members of other religious constituencies that generally went in favor of Biden, including other Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and Hindus, all have a minority that actually still preferred Trump. Now, I hope that this alone provides fundamental evidence that religion matters for Asian American political outcomes. In the first set of takeaways, these findings hopefully dispel the idea that there is an Asian American voting bloc full stop. The bloc is mostly there if we disaggregate Asian Americans by ethnicity, but there is a clear holdout if we reorganize Asian America by its religious affiliations. And while conservative Protestants stand apart politically from other Asian Americans, they are also less favorable to the Republican Party relative to their white conservative Protestant counterparts. In this section, I wanted to talk briefly about the role of nationalism. For most of us, we prefer a society that's equitable and inclusive of many groups, including us and the groups that we belong to. We might call this a kind of multicultural nationalism. And by contrast, we have seen a fair amount of discussion over white Christian nationalism, which favors a kind of singular racial and religious domination. We have evidence from various studies that white Christian nationalism played a significant role in the attack on the Capitol on January 6, 2021. And as you can see in this image, at least one of the protesters there was waving the Christian flag in the lower left corner. But what shocked me, and perhaps some of you who didn't see this on your newsfeed, was the presence of Korean, Japanese, Vietnamese, and Indian flags also at the protest. This is not a fabricated set of images from AI. In an event touted as espousing white supremacy, there were Asian Americans present. So what is going on? The question of whether white Christian nationalism matters to Asian Americans drives the next set of findings. This too, by the way, is a ChatGPT image when I gave it the keywords white Christian nationalism, Asian Americans. I imagine this would be an interesting conversation in itself over how ChatGPT understands these words. Now, turning once more to the CMPS 2020, I asked a series of questions, as you can see here. These questions pick up on a conceptualization of white nationalism and Christian nationalism, and combined together we get white Christian nationalism. From the Asian American sample of respondents, the WCN scale runs from about 1 to 25 points, higher value meaning greater agreement with the statements affirming white Christian nationalism. First, notice that the mean of WCN for Asian Americans is only about 10.2, which is below the midpoint of the scale. This suggests that for Asian Americans, there is less agreement with WCN, but it also indicates that it's not absolutely rejected by the majority of respondents either. When I run this same scale for all racial groups in the CMPS, we see that Asian Americans score slightly lower than most other groups. White respondents showed the highest levels of agreement with both white nationalism and Christian nationalism. Turning back to the Asian American sample, I used the same religious affiliations we saw before, and we can see that conservative Protestants are the closest to the midpoint of the WCN scale, showing that they are more likely to support WCN over any other religious and non-religious group in Asian America. But we should not misunderstand this. Asian American conservative Protestants are at best moderately supportive of white Christian nationalism. They are not ardent supporters nor ardent rejectors of this ideology in the way that the items read on the scale. Other Christians and Catholics have lower means for WCN, and the non-Christian groupings and non-religious have slightly lower means as well. Again, their scores are surprisingly higher than what I would have guessed. I had expected mean scores closer to like a 4, for example, as opposed to an 8.5. So even though non-Christian Asian Americans have moderate endorsement of this ideology. Now, what's the consequence of this ideology? When we look at vote choice, we see that Asian Americans who preferred Trump had a significantly higher WCN score on average compared to those who supported Biden. And when we disaggregate the Asian Americans by the religious affiliations, we see the same pattern across the board. Trump voters for every religious group had sizable higher means of WCN compared to Biden voters. The most dramatic contrast here is among atheists. But the smallest gap between Biden and Trump voters on this scale is not with any of the Christian groups, it's with Hindu Asian Americans. So, in the second set of takeaways, white Christian nationalism is supported in greater numbers than what we would have probably imagined. Most surveys lack sufficient Asian American group samples to make this kind of a distinction. And in addition, endorsement of this ideology is not limited to conservative Protestant Christians, nor to Christians on the whole. And lastly, one of the consequences of agreement with this ideology was greater preference for Trump in the 2020 election. So, as a bonus, I wanted to show you how important WCN is relative to interpretations of the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol. The CMPS asked all respondents for their view on that incident by asking them to select the statement closest to their personal view. They read as follows: Trump encouraged or incited the attack. He shares blame for what happened. Second, rioters were inspired by Trump, but he should not be blamed for encouraging them. Third, Trump had no connection to the rioters. He should not be blamed at all. And this is what we see when we again check for the mean value of WCN relative to each response category disaggregated by religious affiliation. Asian American conservative Protestants stand out for their higher WCN means, even for those who believe Trump shares in the blame for the attack. So there is only about a 2 percentage point gap between those who blame Trump and those who exonerate him among conservative Protestants. But notice the impact WCN has among Asian American Muslims, atheists, and agnostics. These three groups have the widest gap in WCN means between those who blame Trump and those who excuse him. So what this suggests as a final takeaway, WCN is not a proxy for conservative Protestantism. It's an ideology that is widespread among many major religious groups and the non-religious as well. Among certain affiliations and non-affiliations, it picks up on important differences in the perceptions of the January 6th riot, as well as presidential candidate preference. Put together, religious affiliation and religion, as signaled in this ideology, suggests that religion as a whole is an important vector that can have predictive power in how Asian Americans think about what policies are important and who they trust to lead the country. We should encourage data collection on these facets going forward, as they reveal important ideological and cultural diversity within Asian America that has important political correlations and consequences. Thank you for your time.
Jerry, thank you for your presentation. And I'm going to begin with some of my own sort of clarifying questions for Jerry. Jerry, and you can pull up the slide if you want, but there was a slide about Asian American conservative Protestants from 2020, and you looked at the 58%, 35%, and the 58% for Trump, and I believe the 35% for the Blues.
Yes.
So I just want to compare that to 2016, because it seems like a lot of the data you're presenting is continuing the narrative from Janelle Wong's book about Asian Americans, evangelicals, and politics. And I remember very distinctly in Janelle's book for the 2016 presidential election, the percentage of Asian American evangelicals, which was her term, which is analogous to your Asian American conservative Protestants category, about 35, 33% in 2016 were voting Republican. So if my memory serves, we've gone from the mid 30s to the high 50s in terms of percentage points. That's a very statistically significant increase from 2016 to 2020. So I see you nodding. I think you're familiar, more familiar definitely than me, and my memory's rusty. But if I'm telling you the story somewhat accurately, what happened in those 4 years for this 20-point plus increase of Asian American evangelical or conservative Protestant support for the Republican Party? Any comments on that?
Yeah, this harkens back to an important point you brought up at the beginning. There are a lot of important transnational considerations we need to keep in mind when we're thinking about how Asian Americans consider their vote choices. So I would imagine that certain Asian American groups had national interests in some of their countries of origin, or maybe the countries of origins of their parents, grandparents, etc. And that may have tilted in favor of Trump because some of his policies, I think, were perceived as being beneficial for their countries of origin. The second factor I'd point out is for a lot of Asian American conservative Protestants, they're borrowing a lot of their cultural toolkit, if you will, from white conservative Protestants. So to the extent that white conservative Protestants were doubling down on Trump in 2020. The Asian American conservative Protestants largely followed in the same direction, but maybe not as intensely, let's say. So it's about like 50-ish, 58% compared to like white evangelicals went something like 70, 75% in favor of Trump that same year.
So thank you, Jerry, for that helpful response. I do have another related question. Jerry's been presenting with the CAAC for a while, and he is my #1 quantitative data person on all things related to Asian American religions and politics. So this is not going to surprise you, Jerry, I am curious about these samplings, these oversamplings, and you mentioned around 4,000 oversampling of Asian Americans, looking specifically at their religious and political orientation. And one of the statistics, and so I'm grateful that you were tuned into my opening set of comments, this is maybe somewhat dated, but the majority of Asians in America are foreign born.
Mm-hmm.
And that typically correlates with English as a second language,
right.
Which means that they may not speak English as their primary language. So when it comes to the 4,000 that were oversampled in the political survey,
right.
were these questions and surveys conducted exclusively in English? Were there questions that were translated in Mandarin or Hindi or Tagalog or other languages that are native to some of these first generations, which predominate the demographics of Asians in America? So just, go into your method stuff on the survey.
Sure. So for those that aren't familiar, if you do a typical national survey like you might hear from like USA Today or ABC News or the New York Times, they will basically sample something like 1,000 Americans, and they'll say this is nationally representative. Asian Americans take up about 6 to 7% of the U.S. population. So that means in a sample of 1,000, you're lucky to get maybe 70 respondents. And typically, if we're honest, we only get about half of that number. So with 35 respondents out of 1,000, at best, you might be able to say something maybe about the Asian American vote in general. You can't do any disaggregating with that. So social scientists have come up with a technique to oversample by taking census information, creating a new map of the United States where there are high populations or dense populations of Asian Americans and areas where there's low density. And what they do is they re-stratify everything so that they can identify Asian Americans in these kinds of locations in a way that's proportional to the population. And then what they can do is multiply that out. So instead of just getting 35 respondents, they can get 4,000 respondents, which would allow us this amazing opportunity to start digging into all these questions that so many of us have had for, well, for me at least, for example, decades running. I'm sure we've all had these conversations, right, with different friends that will say like, oh, I know exactly why people voted, why Koreans voted this way or that way, right? And for me as the social scientist trained person, like, how do you know that? Where did you get that from? How are you coming up with this explanation? And now we finally have some quantitative data that can help unpack, are these things actually related to things like transnational interests? I think the CMPS might even have a question or two on that. So that's something for us to investigate in the future. So that's one methodological point, like what is an oversample for? The second thing, as David just pointed out, we have a lot of non-fluent Asian American friends, family members, and what they do in these surveys, they also try to translate. Due to costs, what they did was they made translations available in Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese. These three groups typically have the highest percentage of non-English proficient speaking populations. Because I guess of issues of colonization, many Filipinos and many South Asian Indians are fluent in English enough so that when presented with an online survey, they can answer it with no big issues. Same with the Japanese as well. So this survey was translated, but I'll throw this out too for everyone's consideration. We find this not just with this survey, but in almost every survey in which translation is available. we're not getting the same ratio of people that we thought would probably need this translated. So I don't know why, but for those that English is not their preferred language, they still try to answer the survey in English, even though translation is available, and it's usually a simple click of a button that changes the wording on the survey page.
That's really helpful, Jerry. And it strikes me that we need cultural brokers, perhaps faith leaders embedded within the community, whether or not pastors. And I know pastors are very sensitive to doing politics from their position of leadership. And so there needs to be more engagement with community leaders and faith leaders to get the word out, to get their voices documented through these surveys. And just to kind of close off this part, do you know out of the 4,000 about how many were actually from translated survey questions? Like, is it 100? Is it 1,000? Any word on that?
I haven't checked, to be honest, but if I remember right, it's not even a third. It's something close to maybe like 10% at most had the survey translated and answered it in translated language.
Got it. Thank you. And I just want to interject here. The Center for Asian American Christianity, we've been striving to frame Asian American identity and experience within this trans-Pacific migration structure. And some of my travels within East Asia, just even this past summer, reinforce the homeland politics kind of gravitational pull, especially upon the first generation. So I was in Hong Kong, and we're seeing a mass exodus of migrants from Hong Kong to the United Kingdom. This is affecting the churches, the Chinese churches, especially in the UK. And it all has to do it goes back to the 2014 umbrella movement, along with the 2019 extradition crackdown by the communist government in mainland China. This affects Cantonese-speaking Chinese people who then immigrate and leave for other countries of safe haven. The point that Jerry was talking about, the Taiwanese and their private and personal information, it relates directly to comments that Xi Jinping has made of recent time, saying by 2027, he intends to take Taiwan back by force. And this has largely stimulated a huge outgrowth of US military investment in its military bases in Japan and the Philippines, especially in response, a naval US response to what is going on in the China Strait. And this can be expanded with reference to India-Pakistan politics, along with what is going on in Myanmar. And so these are all illustrative that when we speak about the presidential election and Asian Americans, we cannot divorce this from the political contestations and imaginations coming from the Asian homeland. And I just want to say that we'll be transitioning in a couple of minutes to a presentation by Khyati Joshi, but I wanted to close out our first session with Jerry with this question about the second part of your presentation on WCN, white Christian nationalism, vis-a-vis Asian American Christians. So the comparative data was fascinating. I love your visual presentations, Jerry, the quantitative information. It helps to ground the entire conference with these empirical points. For the comparison between Asian American Christians and white Christian nationalists, I'm still mulling over the takeaways you presented, but how much do you think moves the needle on the data for Asian American Christians with respect to the Christian stuff versus the other stuff, the ethnic racial consideration, which ties into the homeland politics? So I know in your presentation, your big takeaway is religion matters for the political actions of Asian American Christians. Got it.
Right.
I'm kind of probing the softer issue on, well, religion often cannot be divorced from these racial ethnic considerations, especially these homeland politics. So I'm interested in explanation and causation. Is it the Christian factor that is aligning, when it does align, the Asian American Christians with Trump because they identify as Christian? Or is it because Trump is tough on mainland China and communism, right? So, which is a different consideration, right? That's not a Christian affiliation. That's just, they think Trump is better for their homeland politics, which is why, whether they're Christian or not, they support Trump. Like, how do you decipher the causation there?
I love that question, David. I don't know that anyone's ever posed it that way. Because I think that's a great contrast, and I think it's possible to model that. You would need to do some, slightly sophisticated statistical modeling to just do a comparison of which of these affects your, let's say, vote preference back in 2021 for Trump or Biden. So that can be done. I have no idea off the top of my head which of these plays a stronger role or not. What I can say, though, is for white Christian nationalism, given that I created it out of two different scales of your attitudes about white nationalism versus Christian nationalism, most Asian Americans lean actually more towards the Christian nationalism. So when you bring it together, I would say more of one's political, cultural ideology towards Christian domination seems to be a driver in how people think about who they want to vote for and things like what their attitudes were about what happened in January 6th.
Jerry, thank you for showing us your research mind at work in live time as we put these tough questions to you. I'm just so grateful for your research and labor in this area, providing us with the most recent quantitative analysis of Asian Americans and Christians and other religions and their political behaviors. Please stick around. We're going to bring you back in the panel discussion, but we need to close out this session, and we're going to kickstart the next session with Kati Joshi. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. See you in a little bit.